I personally think that time management is one of the most important skills in life. Do you ever look at a very successful person and wonder to yourself, how do they do it all? How do they have it all? How do they have time to fit everything into their schedule? Everyone in this world has 24 hours in a day. Not a single person in this world has an unfair advantage when it comes to time. Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Alice. I am a Canadian CPA and I have a background in management consulting and finance. I was a director at a management consulting firm by the time I was 28 years old, and I have a plethora of experience in corporate and also now as an entrepreneur. If you're new here, do consider hitting the subscribe button and let's get right into it. The point of today's video that I'm trying to make is that you absolutely can have it all in life. You just have to learn how to manage your time better. No matter what obligations you have in life, I think we all have a little bit of time for yourself. Self-care, to work on yourself, your own goals and things that you want to do in life. Am I right? First, time management tip. How much time are you spending on your phone? If you have an iPhone, go open the screen time app and check how much time you're spending on your phone. The average person that has a job, that has a family to take off, that has to commute, has about 3 hours a day for themselves. So if you have 3.5 hours a day to yourself to work on your goals, to do the things that you want to do in life, to help you move forward with whatever it is, do you really want to be spending those 3.5 hours scrolling on Instagram or social media? If you spend 1 hour a day, that's 7 hours a week. And after 1 month, that's about 30 hours a month. And by the end of the year, you would have wasted about 15 days in total just on Instagram and scrolling on your phone. If you focused on one goal for 1 hour a day, it might not seem like a lot, but after a period of 6 to 12 months, that could change your life forever. So if you struggle with social media distractions, which we all do to some certain extent, then you may want to consider downloading a time blocking app on your phone where you're not allowed to access the app during a certain time. Maybe you can even delete the apps off of your phone if they're very distracting for you. The next tip is to do time blocking in your calendar. So if you've never heard of a time audit before, I recommend you do a time audit, which is basically what it sounds like. You're just auditing how you spend your days and how you spend your time. It can be very eye-opening when you do one of these because you just know like how you're spending and wasting your own time. But time blocking with your calendar, whatever productivity or time management app you use. So for myself, I use a combination of Google Calendar and Microsoft To Do, and sometimes I also write things down in my notebook as well. I like using Google Calendar because I like the color coding features of Google Calendar, which you don't get in other apps. But literally time blocking, even though as cheesy as it sounds, is super effective and powerful at helping you structure your day so you don't feel like you're just wasting time wondering what you're doing with your time and your day. Google Calendar is probably the most user-friendly that you can use because you have access to it on your phone and you can just open it up and look at it at any time. Some people will use things like Notion. I personally find Notion to be a little bit complex. It's really good for people who have more like logically wired brains with a lot of logic functions like if-then statements. Notion would work good for you then, but I find it to be a little bit too complex for me. You can also do it the old school way with pen and paper as well. Obviously that works. If your work uses the Microsoft tech stack, then the Outlook app also has a color coding feature as well that I like. Ideally, you want to use an app that allows you to integrate both work and life, because nowadays with remote work and technology, the lines between work and life are a little blurry. Tip number 3. Multitasking is just a buzzword, right? In fact, it's usually just a corporate buzzword. I personally do not believe in any form of multitasking. When people, companies, HR say multitasking, what they're really saying is that they want you to be more effective in less time. They just want you to be a more effective person. They're not literally saying that you should be doing 2 things at one time. That's where I kind of struggle with the concept of multitasking, because by definition, you cannot do 2 things at one time. You can only do 1 thing at a time. The only time that you can truly multitask is if you are doing something that requires very little brain power or thinking, right? So for example, you can knit while you're watching TV. You can go for a walk while you're listening to an audiobook. You can wash dishes while you're watching your toddler. If you try to multitask on a lot of complex topics that requires a lot of thinking, that just leads to overwhelm and frustration, right? And then procrastination, and you basically end up doing nothing. So remember that you cannot be at all the places doing all the things for all the people at one time. Juggling, on the other hand, is not the same as multitasking, right? So you can be working on 2 different projects, working on 2 different files, client work at the same time, and be juggling back and forth between them, handling two things at once, but you can't literally do them both at the same time. So time block in your calendar, double down on that one task, finish the one thing, and then move on to the next thing, rather than have like 8 different windows open, trying to do all the things all the time. I find that that generally leads me to be less productive overall. Next, very important tip is to always plan tomorrow today. Planning is so critical. It's kind of like when you're in school and the teacher tells you that you have to plan your essay before you write it, right? When you do casework and people think that, oh, I don't need to plan, I could just go right into it, I don't need to plan my essay. And you may think that spending that extra 10 to 15 minutes to effectively plan your day, plan the things that you have to do, is a waste of time, but it is so powerful. It really makes all the difference because it actually saves you time and allows you to focus on the things that you know you need to do and not get overwhelmed by little things. So always plan tomorrow today. That way you're never just kind of like sitting around wondering what you need to do next. Always plan your day the night before. At the end of every day, one habit that I developed early on when I worked in corporate is to always write down the top few things that I need to get done the next day, right? And you will have to revisit your plan basically at the end of every day because things come up during the day and then you got to move stuff around, right? So always be planning and always be adjusting your plan. Next time management tip is to spend 10 minutes journaling every night or doing a brain dump every night. So if you have a lot of ruminating thoughts about work, about business, about things you need to do the next day, and you find yourself waking up in the middle of the night thinking about these things, then I recommend literally doing a brain dump, some sort of journaling, every night before going to bed. This one was a huge one for me and it was a big game changer because otherwise you are just carrying the stress of fleeting thoughts into your sleep, and you want to make sure that you are capturing every fleeting thought. So whether it's a small task or it's something that you want to say in a meeting or something that you want to say in an email or something you want to say to someone or just a random idea that came up in your head, brain dump it, journal it once a day, usually at nighttime. Journal everything, use the sticky notes app on your phone. It's super good stuff. And I find that putting something down in written format really makes a huge difference because we always have so many fleeting thoughts throughout the day. Sometimes I'll be working on something and then I will randomly have an idea. I should make a piece of content on that. And if I don't write it down, and then I will end up forgetting, and then sometimes I'll be sitting here thinking what content to make and being like, I had all these ideas during the week. I can't remember them all now. I also find the Evernote app to be super useful. So if I'm reading or taking a course or learning something new, I always take notes in Evernote. And so that way, everything that I learn kind of gets dumped into one area. This is something that I learned from a book called Building a Second Brain. I like having access to all of my notes and all of the things that I learned at the tip of my fingers. And when I worked in corporate, I used Microsoft OneNote to do this. I had all of my notes divided up by meetings, by processes, by team members. All the little things that I had that were on my mind were all in my OneNote. The next tip is on health, because all of the top performers in the world still prioritize health no matter how busy they are. Remember what I said earlier, assuming that you work 8 hours a day and you have to commute and you have to take care of your kids, you have about 3.5 hours every day to do something for yourself. So make sure you schedule in your workouts. Find a time to go to the gym and schedule it. You don't need to spend 2 hours there. You only need to spend about, 30 minutes a day to stay in shape. You can also join a class or, joining some sort of class structure if you find that to be more motivating for you. Now, if you are a really busy professional, an executive, an entrepreneur, and you really, really don't have time to go to the gym because your calendar is blocked, from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. When I worked in corporate, I definitely had days that were like this. Then what you can do is you can get a walking treadmill. It's impossible to hit 10,000 steps a day without having at least 1 hour to just go walking intentionally. So I recommend pulling out that under desk treadmill when you're working on lower cognition tasks. If you're working on something repetitive that doesn't require much thinking, then get onto the treadmill. I personally find that when I'm working on something more complex, I do better when I'm sitting as opposed to standing. And when it comes to your health, I recommend trying to be proactive about your meals and your meal planning so that food is never a reactionary response, especially if you're like a busy professional. I know sometimes food just gets put on the back burner, and what you decide to eat at the end of the day, because you're just so tired and burnt out from work, it just ends up being whatever is convenient. But if you plan ahead of time and you're proactive with food decisions and being healthy and you prioritize that, then it makes it a lot easier, obviously. Planning is key to staying healthy when you're busy. Next tip is for people who work from home, or even if you're at the office, but you find yourself bogged down in back-to-back calls all day long. One thing that I used to do is I used to time block my calendar with work blocks. That way you can set some boundaries with people who always want to set up a 30-minute Zoom to talk about something. And the goal of every time block session is to get into deep work where you're in flow and you're super focused and your output is very high, and that's when you produce your best work. If you've ever read Deep Work by Cal Newport before, he talks about time blocking a lot. I highly recommend that book. Next tip is to be consciously engaged wherever you are, because nowadays we can physically be with somebody but not really be there because of our phones. You guys know what I'm trying to say, right? This is something that I'm still consciously working on myself all of the time. If you have time blocked out for working out, then just focus on working out. If you have time blocked out to spend with your family, your kids, whatever it is, like weekend time, then focus on those things. If you have time blocked out for one thing, then just focus on that one thing. Because what happens is that you have time blocked out for one thing, but you're thinking about another thing, then it gets really distracting, and that leads to a lot of overwhelm. It's almost like a discipline to be consciously engaged in what you're doing at any point in time. We are all so distracted these days. Next tip on time management, I think this one is really important, is your transition time between tasks and between meetings. So what does this actually mean? I highly recommend, if possible, stacking relevant meetings back to back so that you don't have to have that transition time in your thinking. Because if you're using one part of your brain for one meeting and then using another part of your brain for another meeting, that can be really distracting overall and just lead you to be very tired and burnt out at the end of the day, because you're just jumping from topic to topic all of the time with no continuity in between meetings and topics. So for example, on Mondays, I would have back-to-backs with my team in the afternoon, and it was not an easy afternoon, but it ends up making you more efficient because you end up saying a lot of the same things, responding to the same problems that come up every time, because basically in every one-on-one, you end up talking about the same things. If you're an executive or you're an entrepreneur and your meetings are all over the place in terms of topics, one meeting you're talking about annual budgets, next meeting you're talking about customer support, and then you're talking to investors about getting financing for the next raise. And then after that, you're on a one-on-one with someone on your team. And then after the one-on-one, you have a whole bunch of interviews back to back the rest of the day to fill a spot. And before you know it, it's 5 p.m. and you realize you've gotten none of your own work done because you've been in meetings all day long. So that's where stacking and categorizing recurring meetings is really efficient. So for example, on Mondays, you're just doing client work. On Tuesdays, you work in the business, so it's marketing and sales. On Wednesdays, it's all about the team and getting through your one-on-ones. So nowadays for myself, I coach on certain days, I film on certain days, I block out certain parts of the day to plan content. So the time blocking method with stacking recurring tasks and meetings, I find to be really effective, because if I was constantly going back and forth between different days with no set schedule on how I did things, it would probably be a lot less efficient and a lot more stressful. Next tip I have is just a little mindset shift, and that is time management is a part discipline, right? You have to know yourself, you have to know your priorities and your life, and be really conscious about how you spend your time. The most successful people in the world are very conscious about how they spend their time, because again, we all have 24 hours in a day, and most of us need to sleep 8 hours a night and need to spend 8 hours working. And when people say that they don't have time to do something, what they're usually saying is that that thing is not important to them, or they don't know how to manage their time to fit the thing into their schedule. Because when something is important to you and it's a priority, then you will go find the time or make the time, right? You literally would open up your Google Calendar and time block it and find the time or make the time. There's also a form of self-respect when it comes to time, because you teach other people how to treat your time. You teach your coworkers how to value your time, you teach your friends how to value your time, you teach your family members how to value your time. I think this is especially hard in a remote working world where we are all expected to be glued onto our devices and to be available to respond to a message at any point in time. I remember when I worked in corporate, I would get messages from people at 11 p.m. and I would be expected to respond. And when I get messages at 2 a.m., 4 a.m. and I would be expected to respond as soon as my eyeballs were open, because there was always some sort of emergency somewhere. If you ever worked in some sort of professional career like consulting, accounting, investment banking, law, real estate, sales, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. They want 24/7 access to your brain at all times. But remember that not a single person in the world has an unfair advantage when it comes to time. Nobody in this world has 24 hours in a day, and most people need to sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. If you're the type of person that can function 100% on 5 to 6 hours of sleep, I'm super jealous. I know people back in the day who were like this. They would only sleep 5 to 6 hours a night and still be super high functioning and productive during the day. I still don't know how they do it. Time is the most valuable resource in this world, and it's not something that you can buy back. It's the most valuable asset that we have, and how you choose to use those 24 hours a day is your choice. And ultimately, how you choose to use your time dictates the quality and the outcome of your life. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. I think you will like another one of my videos, which is on leadership. I will leave a link up top here as well as down in the description below, and leave a comment down for me. Let me know down in the comments below whether you have any good time management tips, and I will see you guys in the next video. Until next time.